Former US President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty in a criminal case that could define his attempt to seek re-election. He appeared in a Miami court on Tuesday, becoming the first former leader to be prosecuted by the federal government. The charges relate to mishandling of classified documents, which Trump insists he had the right to possess. His trial could run into the 2024 presidential race.
It's a journey that no other former or serving US president has had to make. Donald Trump remaining hidden behind blacked-out windows as his motorcade made its way to the Miami courthouse. Already there, hundreds of Trump fans waiting for a glimpse of the former president. The atmosphere at times more like a festival than a high-stakes legal case.
From the mountains, everybody! President Trump is innocent. This is just a witch hunt against a candidate running for office.
We come to show our support to Trump. He's our best president. And Trump is totally innocent.
We're here to support our great President Trump, the real president.
Inside the courtroom where cameras were banned, the former president pleaded not guilty to dozens of federal criminal charges, including that he broke the Espionage Act by illegally stashing sensitive defense documents and lied to officials who tried to recover them.
Are you ready? Are you ready? Food for everyone. Food for everyone.
But if he's feeling the pressure, there was little sign as his 77th birthday celebrations kicked off a day early in a Cuban restaurant.
Happy birthday to you.
This latest controversy doing little to dampen Trump's support to become the Republican presidential candidate in 2024.
J. Trump!
And later at a fundraising event at his New Jersey golf course, Trump again insisted that he's done nothing wrong.
Under the Presidential Records Act, which is civil, not criminal, I had every right to have these documents. Whatever documents a president decides to take with him, he has the right to do so. It's an absolute right. This is the law. And that is something that people have now seen, and it couldn't be more clear. They ought to drop this case immediately.
It could now be a year or longer before Trump's trial actually begins. Plenty of time to ramp up his campaign to retake the White House.
Boris Forman is a professor of political science at Bard College here in Berlin. What was your takeaway from Trump's speech about the case and his defense?
I think nothing very surprising. What he said was to be expected after what we said in the last years. After what he said in the last years, really. So, basically portraying this as a political witch hunt, very clearly addressing Biden directly as the instigator of what he calls these fabricated and fake allegations. And so, yeah, this is nothing surprising. I think what's important, though, is that it shows the dilemma that the political system in the U.S. is in, which is that from the right, this looks like a witch hunt or like a system trying to persecute a former president. From the left, it looks very much like the institutional balances and the possible checks are blunt. And so I think there is a major legitimacy crisis that the system has on its hands.
OK, well, whatever either side believes, how strong would you say is the case against Trump?
I mean, it's one case among 4 cases that are currently being discussed, one of which started out because of the hush money that was paid to Stormy Daniels a while ago. And there's 2 other potential cases that are coming up about the interference in the Georgia election and the attack on the Capitol. And it looks like this is, I guess there's a culmination of these cases, and that's the second least compelling case, I would suppose, in terms of the charges. Obviously, there is historical context that this has never happened before. But I think Trump is very much using this politically, and it looks like he's playing for time. This will probably not be decided before the election, and whatever happens once he might be the president again remains to be seen.
And he seems to be using this to his benefit. I mean, is he managing to use it to fire up that voter base of his and get even more people on board?
At least it looks like it doesn't harm him. His polls have been very constant over time, have even increased at points, and he's using this. Yeah, we have a very polarized system that is being talked about again and again, and it's obviously true that the perception of politics is polarized as well. And so yes, he seems to be able to use this. Ron DeSantis, who is his main competitor really in the game, in the primaries, has backed him on this point. So it looks like it's rather playing into his cards.
But Boris, I want to ask you about one thing, his defence team. Some key players have left in recent weeks.
That's right. That's right. Some have decided to leave his team. He's been scrambling to find new lawyers and a new defense strategy. It seems like obviously some of the points are very serious, the obstruction of justice. But when we think back of the two impeachment trials, in a system like this, where you have a strict polarization between the two major parties, and a polarization also that is reflected in these other institutions, it's very difficult to come to some common terms of what is just and what is right. And it's very difficult to maintain a democracy under these circumstances.
And just one last thing. What if the case drags on past next year's elections? How could that affect both the election and this case?
I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Now there's a lot of attention for the next 2 weeks or so. Then probably we'll get started talking about these other cases that are still to come. He will, every time that this will pop up again in media discourse, he will use it for his own, to mobilize his own base, and probably, well, I'm not going to make any predictions, but...
Don't do that, Boris.
It's going to drag on for a long time.
And we won't do that either here. Thank you very much for being on the show, and great to get your analysis, as always, Boris Forman.
Thanks a lot.
Well, for more, let's bring in Mark Fisher. He's a senior editor at The Washington Post. Great to have you with us. I feel like describing it as a spectacle is underselling it somewhat. What goes through your mind when you see the crowds at the courthouse, the wall-to-wall coverage here?
Well, the wall-to-wall coverage is exactly the right thing to focus on because the crowds themselves were not that large. It's really the media spectacle, and that's what Donald Trump has always specialized in throughout his career as a real estate developer, as a businessman, as a casino magnate, and as a politician. So he is achieving what he's always achieved, which is becoming the center of attention, being the showman. And so here he is, and what would ordinarily for most people be the bottom out of their lives, the absolute worst day of their lives, being arraigned in court, facing years, if not decades, in federal prison. And what he's created here is a spectacle that puts him at the focus of Americans' attention, which is where he's always wanted to be. As he always said, he doesn't care whether the news is good or bad as long as he's the headline.
So how does it all stack up? The circus around the courthouse, the songs, the demonstrations, how does that stack up against the severity of the charges that Trump is facing?
It does seem incongruous. It seems like a complete mismatch. People on the street are taking this as some form of entertainment, or perhaps some sort of dire threat against the nation and its stability. In fact, it's neither of those things. It is the perhaps inevitable denouement of a man who ran the country as he'd run his business, with little regard for the rules, with little regard for norms. And so to Donald Trump, it was second nature to take the documents that he was at least titularly in charge of when he was president, and turn them into his personal property. This is a serious matter because there are classified documents involved. This is a serious matter because he defied the efforts of the FBI and the Justice Department to get those documents returned to the government to whom they belong. And so he does face serious threat here. But as you saw in the interviews on the street, to a lot of people, this does seem like an attack, a political attack on Donald Trump. And they have some grounding for that belief because they look at other politicians who have perhaps inadvertently taken government documents home with them, and they're not being tried. And so they see this as perhaps an extreme reaction to Trump's behavior.
Beyond all that noise, how strong is the case that prosecutors have against Trump, Mark?
If you go by the letter of the law, the evidence that's laid out in the indictment certainly meets and surpasses any threshold for conviction in this case. There appears to be, if you're looking at it simply believing what the government has presented. Obviously, they need to prove it in a trial. But if you believe the indictment at face value, then clearly Trump has done these things. Trump has admitted that he took the documents that he wasn't supposed to under law. It's clear from the evidence that he objected to and took steps to avoid returning some of those documents to the government. But that's very different from getting a conviction in a trial where a jury is selected, where a jury will have different attitudes about Trump, where a jury will have seen any number of ads and memes and reports about Trump claiming that this is a personal attack, that no one else would be prosecuted for exactly the same acts. That will resonate with a good many people.
The prosecution, Mark, says they want a speedy trial. What are the chances of that happening here?
This trial is on a collision course with the 2024 presidential campaign and election. The Justice Department has a standing policy that they don't prosecute people who are running for office in the weeks ahead of an election. There's no hard and fast rule about how long that period is, but they try not to interfere with elections. But we're already in a campaign. Donald Trump is already running for president. He's already making appearances in the early primary states. The first debate is coming up in August. So this case is on a collision course. There are all kinds of things that will affect the timing. The judge, for example, the attitudes of the lawyers involved on both cases. Trump himself says he wants a speedy trial. The prosecutors certainly say they want one. But Trump has many ways in which he could slow this down and force the Justice Department's hand as it runs into its own rule against interfering in a political campaign.
Trump, of course, lost some lawyers just before we got to the court in Miami. The judge, though, is a Trump-appointed judge. Could that have any relevance as the trial goes on?
Theoretically, it's not supposed to. Judges, of course, are supposed to be independent. Judges are supposed to take each case as it comes and deal only with the evidence at hand. However, this judge, Aileen Cannon, dealt with an earlier aspect of this documents issue. And when she did, she issued rulings that made it much more difficult for the FBI to gain access to the documents they needed for this investigation. That judge's ruling was overturned by a conservative panel of appeals judges. So she was overturned by judges from her own political background. And so she is someone who is identified by both Republicans and Democrats as someone who may have a particular leaning toward Trump or a friendliness toward Trump's arguments in this case. And so there's considerable concern that she will not be as straight and on the up and up as one might hope any federal judge would be in a case like this.
Mark Fisher, senior editor at The Washington Post. What a ride this is going to be. Thanks for being with us on the day.